Hello and welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour, sponsored by Lake Monster Brewing and That's Badass Wood Art. Remember to use promo code CT Pocket at that'sbadasswoodart.com for 20% off any one item. Joined today by Matthew Coller, Purple Insider. How are you? How has your offseason been? I think it's been pretty eventful from a Viking standpoint, but how are you doing?
It has, but I feel like it's been a lot more refreshing waiting for things to be resolved than it has been things being resolved, right? And
Yes.
hunting for quarterback rumors and so forth. It's been more of a slow burn than it has been everything sort of coming at once. If you remember last year, there was like the Danielle Hunter thing, he's coming back, and then the Kirk extension, and then contracts being redone, new coach, new GM, and everything hit us like a tidal wave. And this year is like one guy gets released, we wait a week, another guy gets released, a guy gets signed, we wait a few days, another guy gets signed, but nothing that has been earth shattering. So I feel like we're still just kind of in a holding pattern a little bit. And then there's will they draft a quarterback and what's going on with Dalvin Cook and all these things that are still kind of floating up in the air. So it's been a little different. I've been afraid to go to Target or something, thinking that as soon as I do, some big move is right around the corner.
I'm still waiting for like clarity on Zadarius Smith. Maybe they're just going to roll with him. I mean, I think Kevin O'Connell touched on it briefly, but he didn't give any context behind it at his media session at the NFL annual league meetings. But yeah, that's one thing where I'm like, what's going on here, guys?
Yeah, and it's more favorable for them to trade Zadarius Smith than it is to release him from a salary cap perspective. But if you're another team out there, you're like, I know you've got to trade him, so I'm not giving you anything. You know, that's how, like last year when Amari Cooper got traded for a fifth, I think everyone was kind of shocked. Like, wait a minute, it's Amari Cooper. He's a great player. Yeah, but it's all about the leverage game. If everybody knows you have to get rid of Amari Cooper, nobody's offering you anything good. They also know, because it's out there, that Zadarius Smith wants a different contract, which nobody's going to want to give him. So if you trade for Zadarius, he's not going to be happy. He's going to ask you for a new contract. So the other team has to deal with that. Instead, if the Vikings are forced to release him, well, then any team can just negotiate with him. And honestly, I think if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm just kind of waiting this out because the Bears still have so much cash that they need to spend. They could be the one team that could actually give Zadarius Smith what he wants. So you're right. The Vikings might end up just hanging on to him, but I would be a little concerned about that just because if he's unhappy with his contract, does that mean, the nicks and cuts that he played through last year, he's not going to play through this year because he wants to get through this contract to get another one. So that's a very dicey situation to me.
Yeah. And to your point as well, we're still waiting on some stuff with Dalvin Cook. Are they really going to have a backfield with that much money in it? I don't know.
Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? I mean, Alexander Madison, I think, he signs so quickly back without really going out over a number of weeks or something and looking for another job where he could potentially fight for a starting position, which makes you think, okay, well, how did they get him to come back? It wasn't the weather. So they convinced him to come back for, a decent amount of money. And maybe he had a sense that he wasn't going to get that much money elsewhere. But I've got to think this man wants to touch the football. He spent 4 years just sitting on the sideline, fiddling with his helmet or something. And every time he gets in the game, he plays well. And I remember those debates from last year where people wanted to trade him for a 6th round pick or something. It's like, he's a good player, though. I think he's a valuable player to you. That 6th round draft picks, they often turn into, something you trade for Corey Vedvik or whatever. But you want some. I think that Alexander Madison could be a really good part of a rotation with Ty Chandler, and maybe you draft one in the mid to late rounds and kind of paint by the numbers there. With Dalvin Cook's performance last year, how he fit or didn't fit that great in the scheme that they wanted to run. And plus, every year we've kind of done the thing in the offseason where it's like, Dalvin's going to catch all these passes this year. And like, no, probably not. And he didn't. And because that's not who he is. That's how he was touted coming out of college. It's not who he's ever been in the NFL. I think that Alexander Madison is actually better at catching the football. I think he has better hands, and you can actually put him out there in not like, running routes like Christian McCaffrey or something, but he can actually go out and catch the ball. And then Ty Chandler, I mean, I was intrigued. I know preseason matters less than it ever has, but he certainly ran over people last year in the preseason and looked very explosive. So if you're going to draft, and I think he's also was 24 when he was picked, if you're going to draft a 24-year-old running back based on, his great production, and then he comes in and shows himself well, like that guy's ready to play. He's not ready to just develop for 3 years or something before you're going to put him in. So all the signs point to they're preparing to move on. Yet again, we're kind of in this holding pattern. And I look around the league and go, who would do it? Like, who's trading for Dalvin Cook at this point? How much he costs, how he performed last year. Everybody's got the analytics. They can all look at the rushing yards over expected and know that, a lot of it wasn't just, they can look at the tape too. The explosiveness just wasn't the same. So that one is probably a tough sell, but they're not like back up against the wall. They need this cap space today to sign Odell Beckham or Lamar or whatever, as far as we know. So, if they kind of play this out leading up to the draft, the one thing you kind of worry about is the Anthony Harris deal, where they thought they were going to trade him. And then they end up not trading him, and he plays on, what was it, a franchise tag?
Tag that year.
One of Rick Spielman's by far worst decisions he ever made. A totally replaceable safety making like $13 million on a franchise tag was absurd, but they got backed into a corner because they tried so long to trade him. So sometimes you just have to know when to cut your losses, take the cap space, give Marcus Davenport opportunity, give Patrick Jones opportunity. I was kind of intrigued by Patrick Jones last year at times. He showed some flashes. So I guess, I'm always going to be for moves that figure out what they're going to have for the future. Getting Ty Chandler in the game, getting Alexander Mattison more playing time, seeing if Marcus Davenport can be, your future defensive end for the next 5 years or something. Like those things to me are a positive considering where they're at. If they roll back with Dalvin Cook and Zadarius Smith, just kind of going to wonder, like, what was this offseason exactly? What was it? Yeah. It wasn't a roster transition. So then if they keep those two guys, we're going to have to view it as all in again. Like this is like a Spielman Zimmer all in again to try to win and repeat 13 wins. And if they don't, it'll be a major disappointment. If they transition the roster, then you could give them a lot more leeway. If you win 9 games or 8 games, you could be like, well, we learned about this guy, and you've got this set up for the future or that set up for the future. Yeah. It's kind of how we feel about this whole offseason kind of rests a little bit on what happens next.
Yeah. Well, and what is next is the NFL draft. So it's perfect time to have you on. And we're all going to put our GM hats on this afternoon and give it a whirl. And if us three were in the war room, who we would pick for the Vikings in April here. So that's not the screen I want.
No fighting in the war room. Hopefully people know that reference.
Can you? I don't. And shame on me if I should.
What is the Dr. Strangelove? The movie Dr. Strangelove. It is a brilliant movie. I think it's Stanley Kubrick, right? Nobody? Yep. Anybody? Okay, Stanley Kubrick, right? Stanley Kubrick. And it's one of the. It would be impossible to explain the movie to you, but it's one of the great lines. Like one of the great. It's got a ton of irony throughout the movie. The whole movie is just irony. And at one point he says, "No fighting in the war room," which is super funny, right?
I'll have to check it out.
Okay, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it. It's really good.
I got us on 7 rounds here. Not going to mess with the default settings, but let's just roll here.
So you have it on turbo. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, I don't want turbo. Not that I anticipate us trading up, but you never know. Things can happen. This is moving really fast. And all 4 quarterbacks are off the board. So doesn't really matter.
It's not April yet. I don't know if I'm 7 rounds deep in draft prep yet.
Oh, we got Ryan here, so we're good. So obviously some of the needs on the Vikings roster still cornerback. They still haven't really filled, I feel like, the void left by Dalvin Tomlinson, though you could say they're trying with Dean Lowry to a certain extent. Feels
he's
like
a guy. He is a guy, so
yeah. Wide receiver, I think, is still a very top priority that it feels like they're going to address in the draft. Obviously, Zay Flowers just went the pick before, but what are you guys feeling here as far as position? Which route would you kind of want to go?
Do we have any trade opportunities? I guess
we do.
My big thing is, unless you have like a surefire guy, which again, Kansi, is that how you say his last name? I
Cansey.
like Kansi. Yeah, I like him. Obviously, he'd be a really good value add to this team. You
Sure.
said we're missing that Dalvin Tomlinson void, essentially, we're trying to fill Dean Lowry and Kairos Tonga. So he's clearly has a lot more upside than either of those two guys do. So that obviously would be a great pick. Also, trying to be a little bit realistic. Matthew and I were talking before the show. There's a very small chance that he's going to be here come draft day at 23. Who knows? You never know how these things go. But, I just, given the fact that we only have 5 picks in this draft, I'd much rather see if we had an opportunity to trade back modestly and still get, maybe another day 2 pick, as well as still be able to get a high end player.
Yeah.
So I think from my perspective with Cansey, if he was there, you just take him and apologize to nobody for your lack of draft capital, because interior rush is so valuable and they have been missing it big time. I mean, Sheldon Richardson 2018 is the last time they really had legitimate interior rush, and that was a long time ago. And Tom Johnson 2017, Sharif Floyd. I mean, it's just been a while since they got after the passer, and I think that's really been missing. Even when you saw it last year, that the edge rushers had great seasons, and yet how many times have they sacked the quarterback? Like 30 something. I mean, you can't rely on 1 or 2 guys to do all the work there. And then you watch a Chris Jones in the playoffs, and that's where I feel like it really shows up. Like if you can get interior pressure. I actually talked with Nick Mullins for a while last year. I was asking him about the difference between outside and interior pressure. And he said quarterbacks absolutely hate interior pressure, which of course the Vikings almost go out of their way to allow it. No, I mean, because it's in your vision and it's crowding you and it doesn't allow you to step up. And there isn't like an answer, where quarterbacks feel like there's an answer of stepping up in the pocket. So a guy like Cansey, who's as explosive as he is, but I agree with you. I just feel like in the PFF simulator, maybe it needs just a little bit of an update there, a little jolt to move him around, because I think with his pro day, I think he also put up absurd pro day numbers. Yep. So he's not probably going number 23. If it's not him, then I think that the trade down idea is exactly right. Although I am, as far as wide receivers, and I don't ever claim to have super hot takes on who's going to make it and who's not. Jordan Addison does really interest me, though. I really like the idea, having seen Diggs and having seen Thielen and their success route running above everything else, right? And even though he's not maybe the deep threat that some guys are, I feel like somebody who's consistently getting open, that's kind of who you'd love to pair with Justin Jefferson. So I would be interested maybe, because I look at those other receivers and I think it's a big drop off from Addison to Downs, Dell, and Wilson, who I have big questions about. Downs and Dell, I don't know what you think, Ryan, but these tiny receivers, I think people talk themselves into them. I don't see it. I don't see it historically. I don't see guys that are 5'9", 5'8", very often succeeding at those positions. And that's what this draft has a lot of after Addison.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I like a little bit more size. I mean, can you at least be 5'10", right? Like I'm granted, even 5'10" is not, you're not finding a ton of great talent at 5'10" in the NFL, even today. But the game is changing a little bit, right? They're protecting the receivers a little bit more. A guy like Josh Downs and Nathaniel Dell, both of these guys are slot only, probably type players. Dell might have a little bit more outside flexibility just because his get off, right? The way he can get off the line and move that DB around with his footwork. He might be able to live out there, but again, at that size, at not just from a height, but also from a weight. There, Dell specifically, he's pretty small. He reminds me of like Tutu Atwell with better feet. So like, is Tutu Atwell burning this league apart right now? Not really. I mean, he played decently well with Baker Mayfield last year. Not really a guy that I'd be interested in. There are some other receivers in the mid rounds that I'm intrigued by. Marvin Mims, Jonathan Mingo. I think both of these guys, again, a little bit bigger than these two that we're talking about. But to your point, Jordan Addison, huge drop off. For me, we did our receiver rankings the other day. I had Marvin Mims actually at 4 over Quentin Johnston, actually. And then I have Johnston and then Mingo right there at like 6. So if we go Addison here, I'd be perfectly fine with it. I was looking at the trade down options with Matt when you went over there. Looked like the top option for us who's interested is Tennessee Titans at 41. That's almost a 20 pick drop. That's a pretty big drop. Now, granted, in my opinion, once you kind of get into that, I don't know, 20 range in the draft here, guys from 20 to almost like 75, there's not a huge like difference to me, right? I mean, obviously positionally there is, but like from a skill set standpoint, you could add a lot of talent within that range, but 41 and 72 doesn't really intrigue me that much. So
yeah, I feel the same way. I think that's probably too far. If you can drop back to the early second and ruin everyone's draft night because they have to wait another night for picks to be made, then because we'll do all of our draft coverage and lead up and everything else, and then it'll be like do. But I agree that's probably too far to drop back. I think at the very end of the first round, maybe. I do think that the list that we're looking at, someone like Deonte Banks also kind of interests me. Like I agree with you that, at least from the way I've looked at it, is there is this kind of cliff where it's like you don't have 31 first round draft picks, right? Because Miami doesn't get one. So you don't have 31 first round draft picks. You probably have more like 20 something. I think that somebody like Addison falls into that category, and probably Banks does too, which makes it a little hard for them here. Because it's like, well, if you drop back even a few spots, like those guys are probably being picked. Yeah. And then you're kind of getting a lesser prospect. At the same time, recent history has been very kind to second round wide receivers. So if you drop back and look at second rounders, like a lot of times we've seen AJ Brown, Deebo Samuel, like those guys have become stars on a fairly regular basis. Even Terry McLaurin was in the third, Amon-Ra St. Brown in the fourth. Yeah, DK Metcalf. So it's not totally uncommon. I'm partial to Addison because I think that there is a drop off after him, but if they traded down similar position, I wouldn't say, "What are you doing, Kwesi? You should be fired."
I'm in on Addison.
Yeah, I think we go Addison here again. Us being realistic in that Concy, he ain't gonna be there. Like he just won't be there in draft night.
Yeah, I agree.
So if we're trying to be relatively realistic, Banks could be there. Is it Brissy? He could be there. Addison could be there. I would take Addison out of those three.
I think we know the answer, so I'm gonna finalize it.
Perfect.
So they get their wide receiver opposite Justin Jefferson for the next decade or so. That would be pretty awesome.
And now we talk amongst ourselves for 2 days waiting for the next draft pick they have.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they try and get up in round 2 at all. I guess I could have sped this up. We don't have to technically wait.
No, but I think, when you lose 100 targets from Adam Thielen, the question is, how are you making those up right now? Okay, so they're going to throw to Hawkinson, but when Thielen was there, they were throwing to Hawkinson for half a season, and we already saw that in play, and you can't just lean on him. You're not going to lean on Josh Oliver for a lot, Brandon Powell. I think that they like Jalen Naylor, which, there might be some intrigue there, but not if you're relying on that. And then the other things too, that you're certainly flying without a parachute if you don't get another wide receiver. That means if KJ Osborne or Justin Jefferson misses 3 weeks, like who's playing for you at that point? And I agree with finding the future guy. And if you work it out, if you take him in the first round, you kind of have it working out. So Jefferson's getting his contract extension, and then the other guy's on his rookie contract for several seasons where you have two receivers and they're not both expensive, and you don't really run into that Bengals thing where they drafted them very close together. And now it's like, T Higgins is going to get paid and then Jamar Chase, but even then there's a couple of years separated between them. So yeah, I kind of like that idea.
Yeah. Question for you before we look at these prospects. Did you read into Kevin O'Connell's comments at all when he talked about that wide receiver group? Obviously he spoke pretty highly of KJ Osborne in that media session. But I thought it was interesting. He just said that Jalen Naylor and Jalen Reagor would just get to compete for opportunities, and not necessarily giving that a vote of confidence for they're going to contribute.
Yeah, the Jalen Reagor thing is They should have just kept those draft picks probably and done anything with them. Yeah.
Like, I mean, but like, I didn't hate the move. It just didn't work out, right? Like, sometimes you got to shoot a shot. He was obviously first round pick for a reason. It just didn't work out. Like, I don't know what it is, if it's work ethic, if it's just the yips, whatever it is, because he was pretty good in college. I mean, not great, but I also just don't really like. I mean, you never scout the school, you scout the team or the player, but I just never think that they work out when they come from TCU. So maybe that's why I have Johnston at 5, even though I think he'll break the mold. I think he'll be a good player.
I think so too. I saw a good amount of him, and I think Max Duggan had his Heisman hype thanks to his receiver. But when it came to the Rager trade, it's not the end of the world that they did it, and I get it. Like trying to trade for somebody who's a first round pick. It's just that those after camp trades or signings, like, do they ever really work? Chris Herndon and Tremaine Brock, and I remember people saying like, oh, they got Tremaine Brock to start over Trey Waynes. It was like, what? No, they didn't get him for that. I promise you that. So like, Blake Bell, the Super Bowl champion Blake Bell was another guy that they brought in. Like, I don't know. These almost never work. It seems like a team gets a little bit desperate and then kind of like, oh no, we don't have a punt returner. Let's give up draft capital so we can get it. He's a better punt returner overall in his career than he was last year. So I guess if he gives you a few good returns, maybe it's worth some late draft capital. Again, not like, Kwesi should resign over it, but I just, maybe be skeptical also if Howie Roseman calls you, just maybe not with that, but not the end of the world. But with Jalen Naylor, I mean, we just saw so small of a sample size. We weren't even sure he was making the team coming out of camp last year because there just wasn't a whole lot of impact that he made in training camp. And then he got in the games, garbage time every time. And, like how much were they caring about Jalen Naylor at that point? Sure. But at least we saw he could catch the ball and run real fast. So maybe there's something, but yeah, I would read into it only to the point of what we already obviously know, which is there has to be someone else playing wide receiver on this team. We just don't know yet. Is it going to be a draft pick? Is it going to be a first rounder, a third rounder? Is it going to be somebody else they sign in free agency? Is there a trade still out there? But it has to be somebody. It can't be Brandon Powell, I don't think.
Yeah, I totally agree. So here we are with pick 87. We're in the third round. Every mock draft I do, I think I always take Garrett Williams because I'm a huge fan of him. I think people are sleeping on him only because of his injury. But where are we thinking here? So we obviously addressed the wide receiver position. Still a need at corner. There's no way that they roll into the season with just those three guys. So cornerback. We talked about interior defensive line. What are you guys feeling here? And I can filter on some interior defensive linemen if you want.
I mean, there's a lot of different options that we can go with. I mean, you had mentioned Garrett Williams. That would definitely fill another big need that we have. Probably a second round talent, maybe late first round talent without the injury. Mm-hmm. So you are getting a value here. Now, how bad is the injury? Is he going to be able to come back from that and be successful? Again, ACL injuries are commonplace nowadays, and it seems like players are able to come back from them. But again, position that really depends on athleticism it's going to be tough. So hopefully he can, make a successful comeback, and I think he'd be a really good value here. The other player that was up there was Carl Brooks. He's an edge. So he's played edge in his career, meaning like a defensive end in a 4-3 style. He's about 300 pounds, or he's a big guy. So he's likely going to be kicked inside at either a 3 tech or as a 3-4 D end, which again is a need of ours, right? We had mentioned earlier with Consi and Brissi that these guys would be definitely people we'd maybe consider. Carl Brooks can bring that. He brings a lot of juice and a lot of like a good speed to power in his game. Smaller school, so the competition's a little less. So he's, of course, hopefully he's going to shine against those guys, which he did. But if you look at the tape, he's got a lot of different things in his repertoire that are able to win, I think, at the NFL level. And then the last guy I'll talk about, and then I'll kick it over to Matthew, is Jamie Robinson. So obviously Harrison Smith's back for another year. And we have Cam Bynum and we have Lewis Cine. So obviously not a huge need, but he's a guy that can to be the future and eventually take over for Harrison Smith. I don't have a ton of confidence in Cam Bynum, unfortunately. So like, I think he's a fine player. I don't think he's a very good player. So Jamie would be able to bring some competition to that room for the future. Also has the ability to play that slot corner role. So that's still something that we don't really have on roster. So if you want to, in nickel sets, have him drop down into the slot, he can play man-to-man with these slot receivers. And then if we go back to base, maybe he rotates in and out, or, maybe he wins that job over a Lewis Cine, who knows? So I like that, him as a player as well. But Matthew, what are you thinking with some of these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that Garrett Williams, his profile kind of reads like somebody that might fit with Brian Flores. Like, he's known as just having a really good ability to track wide receivers, man coverage. We're going to look for that. Unlike Hodges Tomlinson, who kind of projects more as a zone corner. So even if he was good at TCU, maybe not the best fit. I did have a moment when you were talking about a defensive end in the third round who's changing positions. Like, where have I heard that before? Oh, every year is where I've heard that before. And I can't remember it ever working. So there is that. It's just every time, like with the Jalen Holmes, I remember when they drafted Jalen Holmes, I was like, who? Jalen, what? And then he's really a defensive end. No. He's actually a defensive tackle. Like, no, he's actually a defensive end. And then no, he's nothing. But there's a guy for Texas. I don't know if he's there. Maybe you could scroll down. Moro Ajomo, who he kind of catches my eye a little bit because of the interior thing that we were talking about. So they draft a wide receiver in the first round, and he had kind of a breakout rush the passer type of season last year and put up great numbers, high PFF grades, high pressures, got after the quarterback, pass rush win rate, like all that stuff. He's a little on the shorter side. I think he's only like 6'3", which is, maybe average size for that position. But I'm kind of keeping my eye on interior pressure guys. Dorian Williams is also another interesting one.
Yes.
And I think that naturally, and I feel this way, like corners, defensive linemen, like let's lean toward the value positions. But Jordan Hicks is not going to be here past this year. So you have Asamoah and nothing. So, and if you look at some of Dorian Williams's like description, his stats and things like that, coverage, lanky, undersized, like all the things that kind of fit with what they want to do. I'm not going to, and the other thing is too, I did actually have it go through my mind of like, if they do trade Dalvin Cook, should they look at a running back here? Because, and I know none of us ever want to draft any running backs, but there is a point where no one has been drafting running backs and then they're awesome. Like, right. And they're worth it. And that answer is probably the third or the fourth round. So Tank Bigsby did kind of come to mind here. Not that I would do that, but I think it's worth having that discussion of all of those players, where Dorian Williams could fit in the future. Linebackers, I think, need a year of development too. I think throwing them in is really, really hard, and interior pressure. What do we got for corners? Oh, I see Jalen Jones has kind of been one of those guys I've had my eye on, but he is off the board. Yeah, he's off the board there. So if there was anyone else other than Garrett Williams, not really. It looks like there's a pretty big drop off after Garrett Williams.
Yeah. And to go back to your linebacker comment, Dorian Williams, great. Another guy I like a lot is DeMarvion Overshown. Again, very similar style player in terms of just lanky, fast, sideline to sideline guy. Both of them are going to have issues with, getting off of blocks, which is just the bigger issues that would come with that. But what I like about Overshown just slightly more than Williams is his blitzing abilities. He's done it very successfully in college, and with Brian Flores, he loves to blitz his guys. So somebody who has a knack for blitzing and finding, the gaps and hitting those hard and getting to the quarterback, it would be good too. So in my opinion, I go Garrett Williams here just because it's a big need. And to your point, there's a big drop off after this for talent.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I see that Andre Carter was taken just before. That's another guy that projects around this area that might be worth looking into, like kind of great athlete kind of thing that might be worth talking about if he's there. But I think the way that this looks right now, it's probably Garrett Williams.
Perfect.
Perfect.
In the essence of time, there's 3 picks left. And as we get deeper into the draft, it's just going to get really hard to kind of figure out. So let's cap it at this next pick. And then we can close with some final thoughts. So pick 119 here. We've got our wide receiver. We've got our corner. So based on what I'm hearing, I feel like linebacker and interior defensive line is probably where we should be looking. So I'm just going to filter on those to start, and then we can.
I love Deuce Vaughn, though. You guys watch Deuce Vaughn this year? So much fun.
Yes.
Yeah,
we talked about him a lot earlier.
Since his freshman year, actually, because I'm a big Oklahoma fan, as all the listeners know. And so we play him once a year, and gosh, he's frustrating to play against because he's so little. So you think, oh, yep, they got them tackled, and then he springs out of there because nobody can actually locate where he is. And he's elusive and pretty fast. So yeah, he was always pretty frustrating to play against, but always fun to watch for sure.
Yeah, I don't think you take him like here, but I don't know. Later round, maybe.
Well, I do like Kobe Turner. I think he provides a lot of juice and a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? His motor is always running. He's a high motor guy, right? At that again,
say the cliched statements, Ryan.
3-4 D end, right? 3 tech and a 4-3. And then I really like Ivan Pace here at linebacker as well. Again, a really good blitzer and pretty strong, pretty solid in coverage. The only thing I don't like about him is he's pretty small. I think he's like 5'10", 5'11", which we already have one of those guys in Brian Asamoah. So we can maybe rep the small linebacker club who can run sideline to sideline and get after the quarterback and get out in coverage.
I think we got some glass eaters here, guys, that are quicker than fast, that have oily hips and so forth. No, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't really know these players. I mean, when we get this deep,
it's tough.
It's not even April yet, guys. I haven't gotten into the 4th round yet.
2 days.
I mean, at this point, I mean, you're just taking guys, right? Like whoever the best guy. If you're trying to fill swings, if you're trying to fill needs once you get past the 3rd, you're probably, like the Vikings drafting Ben Gideon for to have a run stuffing linebacker. Come on, what are we doing here?
I also really like Yasir Abdullah there. If we do go edge. Yasir Abdullah, I think he's very, very talented. That would probably be my actual recommendation if I were in a war room. I think he has loads of talent, high motor. He tested really well at the combine and was very productive in his years at Louisville. And we'll need edge help after next year, especially if we move on from Za'Darius. And Davenport's only on 1 year. So that's probably would be my recommendation here.
So what I'm hearing is you and Matthew are duking it out between that and Deuce Vaughn here.
I mean, look, he's good, right? This is what I was talking about. If you're talking about taking a running back, you definitely do it around here. Then I wouldn't criticize it because it isn't really about the needs. It's just about who's the best player that can make an impact. The one thing I think about with defensive ends and edge rushers as we get later in, I mean, it does make logical sense to draft guys who are great athletes, but if they are great athletes and they get to the 4th round, they must be bad at football, right? I mean, because if they were good, everyone would take them really high. And I've just, maybe it is just the bias of seeing it play out with the Vikings that every year they're taking the next Daniil. And it just never happens. Oh, we love this guy, his length, his athleticism, everything. I'm not saying like don't ever do it. Right. I just wonder if that strategy would actually, it's more of a question like, does that strategy actually bear out as being a good idea? Because we talked about receivers. If you're taking receivers in the 4th, that's probably a good idea because you do have a chance of at least that guy becoming some type of player for you. So there's probably different positions, linebackers, running backs, receivers, safeties, probably who you could take in the middle rounds and have a good chance of succeeding. And I'm not sure edge rushers is it. That's more of a question than it is a strong statement. And maybe I just watched too many DJ Wanham plays.
So what do you guys want to do? Doesn't really matter, but
Matthew's a guest. Let him make the pick.
I'm Deuce Vaughn all the way, guys. Let's go for it.
Juicy.
Come on.
I love Deuce. Yeah, I'm happy with
Let's
that
make
pick.
some plays out there. If they cut Jalen Reagor, they will need punt returner. So
There it is. Our attempt at a full 7-round mock, but like we said, in the essence of time, we came away with some good players though. Jordan Addison, Garrett Williams, and Deuce Vaughn. I mean, let's roll with
That'd
that.
be fun. That'd be a fun draft. Like I'd be really happy with that, to be honest. So
I think our draft probably tells you why they'll trade down because it's just like, and then only 2 players that might matter. I mean, that's the really the good case for it. It's just, is Kwesi going to run into everyone knowing he wants to trade down and then not giving him very good offers and things like that, which I suspect is what happened last year. But I mean, if they came away with a starting wide receiver, a cornerback who could potentially start eventually and has high end ability to fit really well in your system, and my favorite college football player to watch, then that'd be a pretty decent draft for a draft with almost no picks. Sure, it's fine.
absolutely.
Let's go. Well, before we let you go, Matthew, I want to get just your grade so far. I feel in my mind, I feel like the Vikings have had a decent offseason, but what's your grade for the Minnesota Vikings through, this will air tomorrow, so March 31st?
Yeah, I just think it's very much incomplete. I know that that's a cop out, but if I had to do it now, I would probably say it's like a C because you've let a lot more talent go out the door than you brought in. But I really like the idea of Davenport and Byron Murphy because those guys, if it works out for you, they could turn into long-term starters. And if it doesn't, you didn't really lock yourself into them very long. Although I don't like the idea of void years. Didn't really understand fully the restructure on Cousins to get hammered on the salary cap next year if he goes. So there are things that I've kind of gone, if one of the goals, like going into it, one of the goals I thought should have been to set yourself up for the salary cap for 2024, where you get to be the Bears, where you get to be the team that's just like, look at all my money. Do you want some? And they won't be that now. That kind of hurts their grade for me at this moment. We don't have a clear path exactly of what's happening at the quarterback position. We're still kind of waiting on these other decisions to be made. What happens next could really determine it. I mean, if they trade up and draft a quarterback, then they're getting A's. I don't care if they did whatever void years, they're getting A's for that. If they get Lamar Jackson, you get an A+.
Yes.
So, how they handle these other situations still matters quite a bit. I guess right now I feel similar to how I felt in past years where it's just kind of been in the middle. It's like some veterans going, some people staying, the Dean Lowry signing with void years. Like, really? We really doing that for Dean Lowry? But I think that there's things to kind of look at and kind of maybe, raise an eyebrow a little bit. But again, if they land the quarterback of the future, then that kind of resolves a lot of the criticisms, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally agree.
Well, thank you for hopping on the show. For everyone listening, if you aren't already, you can follow Matthew Coller on Twitter at Matthew Coller, Purple Insider, anything you're working on coming up. I know I saw a Hot Routes episode be released. I haven't had the opportunity to watch it or listen yet, but what else is in the works?
I actually have a story that's going to come out next week about the Denny Green and the United Football League. So everybody's watching the XFL, USFL's coming back. The United Football League has gone forgotten. So I talked to some people who were involved in the United Football League about Denny, Dante Culpepper, the Sacramento Mountain Lions, and kind of that whole experience. So that's going to come out. If they don't do anything crazy over the weekend, planning on it for Monday. If they do, then I'll push it back a day or two. But that should be a pretty fun story for people. And then,
awesome.
The podcasting, the other stuff, everybody knows about that.
Your guest list has been incredible lately, by the way, ever since the scout. Was it the scouting combine? You were at the combine, right?
Yeah. That was good. That was good. A lot of people were. I kind of created my own little setup right outside of the media room so I could grab people coming by. But that worked out great. I thought that was a good sit down for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah too, because he had not really been in public a lot with press conferences and things like that. And I think that USA Today article was still kind of shaking him a little bit.
Yeah.
And so to have more of an informal sit down where you could do an interview that wasn't in front of the cameras and things like that, we kind of got a little more of what he had been when he first became the general manager. So hopefully he could shake that off and say, hey, it's just a bad rep, man. You just move on. But yeah, no, that was a really interesting and insightful experience. I think it was there we kind of realized like this Kirk thing is probably not getting resolved with an extension anytime soon from the way he talked. But yeah, no, it's been good. It's been, I mean, from my perspective, it's been a very, very interesting offseason to talk about. I'm sure for you guys as well, because there's just like a lot of these puzzles to still be solved. And that's always the best part.
Absolutely. Well, we got a whole month left of speculation and potentially moves to look forward to, and all the rumors that will continue to swirl. So thanks again for joining us. And for everybody watching, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We're doing a giveaway at 3,000 subscribers, a custom made That's Badass Wood Art Skol piece. So until next time, everybody, Skol Vikings.